Hi there, this is Michael Morris. I directed this episode, which is episode 601, titled Wine and Roses. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the elements, ideas, and impulses that went into the making of this teaser sequence that kicks off the final season of the show.
Why don't we watch the teaser a few times so we can examine it from a few different angles?
Peter and I spent a long time discussing the tone of these scenes, which I wanted to play as overlapping continuous oneers. I wanted the idea to be a sort of immersive trip through Saul Goodman land. But Saul Goodman land as it's finally coming apart at the seams, as it's being boxed up and taken away. So it was a sense of discovery, and in order to do that, we knew we wanted the camera moving through everything, which meant designing spaces that would allow the camera to move. And, you know, when you shoot something in a wide lens and you want to move the camera a lot, you have to have an awful lot of design. The camera sees everything, and we were in big spaces. So as we walk through this sequence, I'll try and point out some of the things that I'm always struck by when I watch it. We had talked about this amazing sequence that Peter wrote since we started prepping the episode, which was in February, and we actually shot it in October. And for me, one of the hallmarks of this opening sequence of this final season was going to be movement. I really, really thought it was important to have the camera almost always moving. And the sense of movement, even in the odd moment when the camera isn't moving, there wanted to be movement on screen. This feels like almost an old Hollywood number. We talked a lot about Citizen Kane when we were planning this, and there are other great films, not just that one, which use a similar type of continuous dolly movement. I wanted to feel that this was all happening around us like dancers, almost like an old Busby Berkeley number. The camera was going to be moving, not so much in a camera move sort of way, by which I mean a straight dolly or a pullback or a pan or a tilt, but a sense of progression, a journey through this space, because we were both learning something very new about this incredibly central character, but we were also feeling something like nostalgia or sadness. And so to me, the way to bring that to life was to move constantly, and not so much to linger or stop, but just to notice things as we go past. And it was very important from the script on that this was a sequence that had Easter eggs from the past and Easter eggs from the future. I don't know if there's a word for Easter eggs from the future, but there are Easter eggs from the future. If you've gotten to the end of the season and you watch the sequence back, there'll be certain things that might jump out at you differently than when you first saw it. So we had a lot of conversations. The first was where we were going to shoot it, because it was a bit of a responsibility, as you can imagine, to find a house that is Saul Goodman's house. And the first idea that Peter had, which was brilliant story-wise, we all thought, was to go back to the house that Jimmy and Kim had looked at in episode 502, which was 50% off, when they went to look at an empty house, potentially to buy it. And that was how we conceived of this sequence. We were going to set it there, and we had a lot of very in-depth design meetings with the brilliant Denise Pizzini. And we had gone quite far down that road. We scouted it a number of times, and I was starting to just assemble the very beginnings of a shot list and some of the blocking that I thought we could do. And it became very complicated to actually use that house for a lot of reasons. So we threw it to the fearless Christian Diaz de Bedoya, who is the quite brilliant locations manager for this show and Breaking Bad, and who has many, many times found miracle locations that we didn't think existed. And he did it again here. So he found a house which is huge and glorious in lots of ways, and which Denise and her team made even more glorious for us. So as we go, I'll point out some of the biggest things that changed, but know as you watch it that nothing on screen is really as it was in life. It was all the product of a lot of design and hard work from all the departments. It is, of course, the first time that we've been at home with Saul Goodman. We've never seen what happens when Saul Goodman goes home in the Breaking Bad years. We don't know where he lives. We know his car. We know his office. But who is he? And I think there's always a question when you look at the series Better Call Saul, how Saul is he? Where is Jimmy? Is there any Jimmy left by the time we get to Breaking Bad and beyond? Secretly, is there any Jimmy left? What of his past life is there? What is created in the image of Saul Goodman? And I think when you see this house and you see the scale of it and you see the gaudiness of some of it, the brightness of some of it, and some of the choices, you go, oh, it's Saul. Who is Saul when he's at home? He's Saul. And I think some of that is funny, and some of that is interesting, and some of that is sad. And I think those competing emotions that you get when you put those pieces together inform the tone of this opening sequence. When I found out I was going to direct the first episode of the season, it was a huge moment for me. Part of the signature of this show, and some of my favorite sequences in some ways, and certainly some of the most beautifully photographed sequences, have been the Omaha scenes, the Cinnabon scenes, the glorious black and white sort of neo-noir documentary, whatever you want to call it, fabulously framed everyday images. And my head started to spin about, I'm so happy I get to do that, to join that particular club. So I got the script and, turned to the first page. It says teaser. Very first thing it says is abstract slashes of eye-popping color. So I knew, as a fan of the show, that was pretty exciting, that we're starting a season not in black and white. But as a director, I have to say, my heart sank a bit. I wanted a little bit of that black and white action following in some good footsteps. And I think it was out of that sense of, hang on a minute, that I had this idea to play a trick, a small visual trick, which was to start on the ties, which is one of the things that Peter had scripted. He actually said bad taste neckties are haphazardly strewn at the bottom of a cardboard box. And the joke that I wanted to play on all of us, and my little bit of revenge for the teaser, was I wanted it to feel like it was starting in black and white. And it was important to all of us that this was a practical effect. This is no CGI involved. There's no trickery involved in this. The brilliant costume designers led by Bryan scoured and found hundreds of purely black and white ties. So we wanted to shoot the ties in this almost ballet surrounding the cameras. We built a rig that involved a phantom camera, which is a camera that shoots at incredibly high film speeds. And if you can imagine a camera pointing down into a specially constructed box, which the props department built for us. The reason they built it, by the way, is that it turns out that boxes are very rarely pure white inside. They're mostly brownish, and that would have given the game away, given that we weren't going to use any camera tricks. We mounted a camera facing down directly into the box, so it was a field of white. We had 2 conveyor belts, one on either side of the box. This was a rig that was developed and designed for us by the brilliant Werner Hahnlein. He and his team got exactly the right speed of motors for these conveyor belts, and we loaded half the ties on one side, half the ties on the other in a very, very particular order. And when we pressed go on this thing, the whole shot was over in about 3 seconds. But we shot it at such a high frame rate that it really extends, and you start to see the movement in these silk ties. And what gives me joy every time I watch it, that you can see the color just bleeding into the frame. So it starts off in black and white, and then very quickly the audience gets that abstract slashes of eye-popping color, and hopefully the effect is one of surprise. We shot the tie sequence at 480 frames per second, and then we played it back at 240. We approached a local dance company and asked them to help us find company members who would be experienced as dancers. So they'd be really good at keeping time. They'd be able to repeat steps. So it was really helpful for myself and Rich Sickler, my fearless first AD, who conceived of all of the movement alongside me, and our amazing supervising producer, Trina, Siopy. Together we choreographed these players so that we knew exactly where they were going to be at any one time, so that Matt Credle, our A-camera operator, who was carrying the camera through most of these things, would always have just enough space to get the camera where he needed it. This is the bedroom of Saul's house. This was actually a very large sitting room that we converted into a bedroom, and Denise Pizzini conceived of this great idea of this huge platform, round, circular bed with pillars and curtains and all kinds of pomp and circumstance. And as he walks past, there are the ties going into the box. In the distance, you see the closet that we're going to get to, and at the top of the closet, you'll see a large gold relief, which, as we get closer to it, or if you've seen 609, is actually Saul's face. And here, as we come past, that suit at the front may or may not be the first suit that we saw Saul wearing. We go into the closet, and one of the things you think about, I think, as Saul is just his incredible wardrobe. As we come past these shirts that are getting dumped on the floor, you'll see right there the Mall Walker shoes from episode 309. A whole bunch of his other shoes. More Mall Walker shoes, and the Panavision hat, which was, of course, from 306, the episode Off-Brand. And as we come past those, you get the Saul Goodman pocket squares, which are pretty much iconic by now. Peter wrote this fabulous idea that there's a hidden safe room inside Saul Goodman's closet. Now, the closet that we're in the actual house is a bedroom. So we were in we converted the sitting room into the bedroom, and we converted the bedroom into the closet. This is just the Saul Goodman scale of doing things, I suppose. And this was a little corridor that happened to be next to the bedroom. And Denise and her great construction team built this into a safe room. And the idea was that it was just very spare and very different. As the mirror opens up into it, you can see he's got security monitors, a chemical toilet. He's got supplies. There's MREs in there and a Kevlar vest. We get a little look at the scale of the bedroom here as the work continues. Moving into the bathroom was actually a set that we built. It was the one part of this that was not shot at the location. As we move past the medications here that she's cataloging, if you pause at the right spot, you'll see that he has a prescription for Numilifor. Don't look up Numilifor. It's not a real drug. It was, in fact, a fake drug invented by Melissa Ng, who's Vince's brilliant assistant, and they did it for El Camino. There was going to be a scene where Jesse saw an ad for this drug as he was flicking through some channels, but it never actually made it to El Camino. The ad was made and put together rather brilliantly by the editor of this episode, Joey Reinisch, and it was so good, in fact, that we used it in an episode that I directed last season, which was number 503, which was Anne Cherkis' episode, The Guy for This. So you'll see that there's a large theme of classical myth, of Greek and Roman gods and emperors. And it's a passing reference, if you like, to Jimmy saying in Alison, Tatlock, and Melissa Bernstein's episode 507, JMM, lightning bolts shoot from my fingertips. And I think that's a good place to build off of. That's production assistant Alejandro. We needed an extra body on the day. Thanks for putting that costume on and throwing those things away. There's a lady's thong that she rather quizzically has to deal with. As she throws everything away, we end fittingly with the gold toilet. The gold toilet is an achievement of art design because they actually managed to find a gold toilet. And when Trina and I got to the set on the morning of this, which was one of the last days of production on this particular episode, the gold toilet just wasn't gold enough. It just didn't look gold enough. And it was one of those old Hollywood, David Selznick moments when you're like, get me a golden toilet, god damn it. And somehow, I have no idea how they did it, but somehow Ashley, our set decorator, did not curse at me and said, no problem, get a gold toilet. And I don't know what they did, but when we came back ready to shoot it, it was really gold. So it always makes me happy seeing this gold toilet. This shot here is, in fact, the only static shot in the sequence and is the only dolly shot. Almost everything else, was operated by our a camera operator, Matt Credle, using a small black magic camera and a handheld stabilizing rig called the Ronin. We couldn't do Steadicam because the Steadicam would have been too big a rig to get in through some of these spaces, and also would have limited our high and low. And we needed Matt to have a really good range of motion up and down. He needed to lean the camera into things. He needed to get to places where we couldn't normally get. We tried everything. There's one incredible mode on this Ronin stabilizing system, which is just like a drone. In fact, it's called follow mode. And we experimented with just putting it into follow mode and tapping the screen every time we wanted to follow something. And then Matt would have just had to walk. And in the end, of course, we could have saved ourselves a lot of time, because the best way to do it was to tell Matt what we really wanted to see. It's a very virtuoso display of very subtle camera operating with unimaginable hurdles that he was almost literally jumping over. This shot of the H.G. Wells book, The Time Machine, which is a future Easter egg for those of you who've seen the full season, and it's short focus, so you just get a hint of the Saul Goodman images, which would have been in his office beyond. And somebody's grabbing something and bringing it down the stairs. And that thing is, of course, the landscape painting from Kim and Jimmy's apartment. And it was the ham scam board, in fact. If we saw the back, that would have been where the Post-its were. This scene in this grand foyer is one of the things that we fell in love with when we first saw the house. And those are real stained glass. That was actually there. The walls were all white, though. Denise and her team, an incredible team of painters, created this very sophisticatedly applied gold marbling finish to the huge wall space. And the whole scene was lit by the sun coming through. We shot at the right time. We worked backwards from when Marshall, well, by now, if you're a fan of the show, you'll know how brilliant Marshall Adams is as our cinematographer. But it was very important that we shoot this at the right time of day so we could get this effect coming through the windows. But what you don't see is on the other side of the windows, massive 50, 60-foot frames put up by our grips, Jake Cross and his team, to knock down the sun. The sun was a bit strong that day. It would have overwhelmed everything. So to get the balance right was an incredible collaboration with the grip department. So we really get to take in some of the scale of the place. The swimming pool was not scripted, but when we scouted the house, we saw a swimming pool, and very quickly it became apparent that this was going to be a really lovely way to actually see Saul Goodman. Of course, we don't see Saul in the sequence. So the idea was to be in the pool and for Saul to just glide out looking as regal and calm as ever. It was a very complicated shot. This was a photo of Saul that was taken by none other than Peter Gould back in Breaking Bad days, in fact, for some web content.
He sent over a couple of options from that impromptu photo shoot, and this was the winner.
We shot underwater in the swimming pool, and we did a bunch of tests. We had a really successful test, and it got everybody excited about the prospects of this shot. Just the magic of film is not always in doing it once, though. It's in doing it many, many times. And it's very challenging to do this particular shot many times. This shot was operated by our B camera operator, Wally Sweeterman. And boy, did he spend maybe about 9 hours at the bottom of the pool, looking up, squinting into a GoPro, and try and just shove that standee. It's a plasticated version of a cardboard standee. Turns out when you lie a plasticated standee on a piece of water, you get a ton of bubbles that block things like his face and expression. This is trial and error, and this is why it was incredibly helpful that we were able to get to this location 2 or 3 weeks beforehand and start rehearsing the ins and outs of this thing. And here's the Lawyer Up car going into the sunlight and then being lifted up, repossessed. But it's lovely to see that Lawyer Up logo for the first time, except for the opening titles, of course, but for the first time in the actual life of the show. Coming into this shot, we open on the famous Ritchie Blackmore signed guitar from episode 308, Slip, which actually I was able to use in an episode I directed called Wexler v. Goodman 506. And it's a guitar that we've seen Jimmy play a couple of times usually when he's feeling pretty good about himself. You'll recognize that dining room from 609. And as we come across here, this is one of a very, very tricky moment for Matt, who had to get in close enough to this code book, which you'll recognize from later on in the season, to see that and the Beanie Baby. But into it comes this box, which we quite subtly marked as no value. In this box, there's some fun stuff. There's the CC mobile balls that he was bouncing in, starting in, I think, episode 404. And what else is in there? There's the cell phones, there's some burner cell phones. And in fact, we saw the original photo that inspired the Mesa Verde logo that we've seen both as a huge 40-foot metal sculpture in the lobby and also in the episode Wexler v. Goodman that I mentioned earlier. Now look carefully, because up here we get a bunch of his famous tracksuits getting quickly wrapped and wheeled away. If you look really carefully, you'll see the TT Straps hat that you first saw in episode 504, Namaste, just there peeking underneath the plastic. And on the left hand of your screen, if you happen to be pausing like I am, on the left hand of your screen, you'll see the drawer part of the Coco Bolo desk that was Jimmy's desk at Davis and Maine. And if we keep playing here on the right, another mover holding the bingo balls that Jimmy used. And just as the shot ends, just as it's fading away, you get 100 points if you see this one. This is the Chi Machine that was actually from Breaking Bad, episode 313, Full Measure. And we're outside the house. This is where the movement of the camera wanted to start feeling like it was pulling away. We've been walking through a spot, and now I like this idea that everything was moving past us. And you'll see on the floor the big Saul Goodman and Associates sign that we introduce in episode 609. There's the standee making its final way out. And then the front of the house, the gold columns weren't there. There were columns, but they were white, very tasteful. And Denise made them gold and added some fabulous details, Romanesque details to them. Also, the homeowners very kindly agreed to stop mowing their lawn for about 2 weeks. The end of the teaser is a reveal, really, that underneath all this Saul Goodman exterior that is everywhere in his life, that is his life in the Breaking Bad era, that there's something he's held on to. And so the idea here was that we really wanted this to feel just like a small accidental moment. We catch this sideboard getting wheeled up. And what I wanted was this stopper just to accidentally roll out and for us to discover it, this secret, this small secret that after all these years, despite the way he's living and despite the Saul Goodman of everything, and knowing that it comes from the beginning of his scamming life with Kim. There's something really sad about the fact that that's what is left, and there's something lovely about the fact that that's what's left too. In the doing of it, we worked on this for a while. There are only 2 actual Zafiro stoppers, I think, in the world. I think they were crafted for the show and made out of copper or bronze or brass. It's a beautiful object, and it became really very obvious very quickly that the one thing you do not want to do with this is throw it from any kind of a height onto a concrete floor repeatedly for hours and hours. And at the end of the sequence, it was very important that the camera would know exactly where the stopper was going to fall, because this was the final grace note in this whole sequence, and it really wanted to be framed. So I'll walk you through this shot, because there's a little bit of trickery here. Werner's special effects team rigged this so that on cue, the door popped open. Right here, the door pops open, but nothing fell out. This was just the camera move. And in fact, the Zafiro stopper that we end the teaser with is pure CGI, and it is down to the folks at Rodeo, who are a brilliant visual effects team, and Diane Mercer, who quarterbacks that whole effort, that we could achieve something that still, when I watch it, still I have to remind myself that that's not a real object. The water was real, the camera move is real, the setting is real, but the stopper isn't. So partly because of the nature of this sequence and partly because we had been talking about it for a long time, I did more of a traditional shot list combined with a very rudimentary shot on iPhone walkthrough as we were beginning to conceive how these shots might fit together. And I actually found this original walkthrough. Here we go. Imagine that we're looking at the sheet being flipped by the movers, and as we step down from the bed, there's the stripper poles directly in front of us. Behind that pillar will be the ties that we will have seen. As we cross here, someone's taking us along this corridor where the suits come. Now here, this was the original bedroom of this part of the house that we made into the closet, and so the shot as originally conceived is kind of close to what we did, where we walk around this room and we see ties, we see shoes, we see pocket squares, and this is the corridor that we converted into the safe room. So we were going to peek into that safe room, see a wide shot of the house, and as someone wipes in here, oops, that door's supposed to be closed. As someone wipes in here, we hide a cut to the bathroom. Now this was actually the bathroom of the house. So we had originally tried to make the shot work up in here, and it became clear that it would have been easier to build it. So this was what was going to be the pills, and we ended up going straight into this because we rotated the room 90 degrees when we designed it. This gives you a sense of how we were going to roam through and end up looking at the Gould toilet, which we were going to build right in there originally. This is the top of the big grand staircase that we do come to. And I was going to have us walk with someone and see a bunch of pictures on the wall. But in the end, I really wanted us to land over the Time Machine book, which was important in the sequence in the season. Very important to Peter too. So that's why that became a static shot. And this is the unadorned house that Denise and Dins Danielson and Ashley Marsh and Nikki Rudloff converted so brilliantly. And in fact, there was another shot that wasn't in the final cut of it. What you're seeing here is a sort of visualization. We mounted a camera. The brilliant Charlie Arnold, one of our grips, mounted the camera to the standee. So as we went through the house, we saw Saul's face the whole time. And there, in fact, was going to be an empty floor safe, which had been cleaned out. Going outside was going to be the first. We were going to be following the suits, Jimmy's suits that we saw wrapped up. And as the suits went outside, we were going to come to the car. We actually flipped the order of one of these shots in the final cut. But there's a version of the shot we ultimately did, and it lifted up. And here was the first draft of going outside. Originally, you'll see that I was walking with the carpets and everything else instead of having them walk towards us. But here I'm going up the ramp of the thing, and my first idea was to follow the Zafiro stopper all the way in a circle as it falls and settles into the gutter. Ultimately, I thought it was more important to see it more in a close-up falling out of the piece of furniture and just doing a very simple boom down. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a bit about how this was all put together. And if I may, as a director, there is no greater thrill than starting with a script that you're desperate to direct, working with a cast that you're desperate to work with, and finally working with a crew that functions peerlessly. So it's been wonderful to be here and talk to you about the opening of season 6, and a little bittersweet. And if you're hearing this, it's all finished. And the crew are probably working on other things. And we've all gone slightly in separate ways, hopefully to come back together to make something else, because this is really the experience of a lifetime.